Almighty God, Abba, Father, thank you that in your immense love and your infinite kindness, you have embraced us as your children through Jesus Christ. We thank you for this gathering here today, the opportunity to discuss the essays of William Pollard. Thank you for Marty's work, especially with this Zoom gathering, and pray your blessing upon the future of it. We ask, as we discuss today by the Holy Spirit, in the light of your presence, that you open our eyes to see you more clearly, that we might love you more dearly, and thereby edify one another here and rejoice. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Bill. Good. Well, today is engaging the sixth book in the series, Theology and Science, The Frontiers of Knowledge, edited by T.F. Torrance. Again, these are people who T.F. selected, so they are people who echo in some way, but also sometimes have a bit of diversity from him. But they were within a wheelhouse of authorities that could engage science and theology and bring to a conversation something that he hoped would last. And again, they were written largely in the late 80s. So one of the things, the book reviews, which I didn't get the book reviews for this until just about 2 hours ago, Carrie was able to send them to me. So I got 4 book reviews. So I've just been looking through those a bit. So with this one particularly, but it's true of most of them, they say they're a little bit dated in the world of scientific thinking because the world of scientific thinking keeps moving so quickly. So this particular work was written in 1987. How many years ago was 1987?
13 plus 23. That would be what? 40? No, 36. What is that? 36? 13 plus 23, 36.
36. So in 36 years, the world of science, we need Carrie Magruder to tell us what, 3.5 decades of scientific advancement would mean. But to say if at the time there are those who were saying that things were dated, the other thing is this is the first of the books that is primarily a collection of essays by the author that have been arranged in a particular order. And so they go back even earlier than the date of publication. So, I mean, part of the datedness might also be part of that. But the question of what is datedness? Yes.
I was just about, sorry to interrupt, but
No worries.
that date issue intrigued me too, because this first essay is 1956. 56.
Right. 56. So from 56 to 86 would have been 30 years. And so there is and I'm trying to remember who it was. Somebody said he was ahead of his time at the point they were written. So to say they're dated doesn't mean that he wasn't a forward-thinking scientist even then, and therefore the nature of the contribution to the conversation is worth visiting. So again, he's somebody who was involved in the creation of the bomb, and he is somebody who one of the people who wrote a book review said they wondered if he had some guilt in being part of that project that caused him then to go back to the site where that was done and to turn it into a research center for doing work, the Oak Hill project, that in a sense this work was somewhat the working out of, and that is the bringing theological and ethical questions to bear on the nature of what happens in science in dealing with a world that needs to bear the consequences of scientific thinking and so forth. So he did become a priest. I don't know that it was out of guilt, though some, again, one person asked the question of if even becoming a priest was out of guilt, but he never lost being a scientist. And he did add this question of what it means to think as a Christian thinker, and he was Episcopalian priest. So the essays do, as you've pointed out, span a period of time in which he was progressing in his thinking about what it means to be grounded as a scientist, a physicist specifically, and also to recognize that potentially something had gone missing. And this book, in many ways, really echoes that something gone missing, which the metaphor of the dark age, to say that the 20th century became a new dark age, is one of his core metaphors in what this book is inviting to be considered and what a Renaissance would look like. Again, the Renaissance around the time of the Reformation was the Christians had gone and taken works that had been banned or burned from libraries of the early Greek philosophers, and so that had been lost. And so the Renaissance was a recovery of a kind of wisdom that had been lost. At some level, the argument in this book is that that form of thought in the secular Renaissance, reviving classical thought, meant that we lost the other rootedness of Western culture, that is the Judeo-Christian component. And that to really have a rich culture, we need to recover that element as well, which is not to throw out the Greco-Roman, but it is to recognize the value of the rootedness of Christian thinking. So he is going to be playing on that issue as we go through.
Mm-hmm.
So when it was written and when it was published are worth noting. So T.F. Torrance obviously was gathering these people at a particular time in history. And so I think it's worth noting that, yeah, there are things where the word dated may be appropriate. And one of the things I'll be trying to work with Carrie when I go, hopefully next year, is to deal with the historiography of when things are written, what people were saying around the writing of a book like this, what implications have been since then. Because the book reviews that I read today, which Carrie sent me 5, they were all written pretty close to the time that the book was published, and so they are relatively immediate responses. So here we are, and another 30, 35, 36 years later. What are we to make of it now? Sometimes there are things that are deemed timeless. And so to ask the question, what are the issues in Transcendence and Providence, as laid out here, that we would say have a timeless character to them? In publishing, there are things that you put out this week because they're news this week, and next week they'll be old news and won't be read. The highest level in publishing that you can do is to write a classic. A classic is something that's timeless. It always has wisdom and insight that people can read it and say, wow, those insights are things that will stand over the test of time. And of course, the Bible is going to be one of those, to say, yes, it's written thousands of years ago in the earliest documents of it, and yet it is timeless because of the God to whom it refers. So the question, as we are with T.F. Torrance asking questions about what it means to live in a culture that is still enamored with science, what is there to be said about this book that allows us to say, we still need to be in a conversation, and people like Pollard are helping us to find ways to navigate what's missing, how we language the nature of our interrelationship with scientific thinking, and the question of transcendence in the title. At some level, the word supernatural, what is natural, which the scientific world tends to focus on the natural world. And in the use of the word transcendence, there is a pointing towards that which is not physically immediately seen or experienced or able to be looked at in a laboratory, and yet is part of the nature of the human experience. So transcendence is to validate the need for talking about the supernatural. He doesn't as much focus on the nature of the human person as somewhat supernatural in and of themselves, our capacity to think and all that, other than as a scientific element. But I think that is also somewhat implicit within it. Ray Anderson's doctorate, Historical Transcendence and the Reality of God, in a sense, is discussing similar kinds of issues in the word transcendence. And to say the nature of transcending is the nature of the personal, to go beyond oneself to engage the other. And so to recognize that in that going beyond, there is something that is beyond merely a physical phenomenon. It's what we call relationships, right? And so the nature of human relationships and the nature of the God-human relationship, that God transcends himself to come in the person of Jesus Christ, and that by the Holy Spirit, we transcend merely the physical world in which we live, and we engage the world in which we move and breathe and have our very existence, and that is the presence of God. So to argue, as Karl Barth does, that it's so easy to think of heaven as far away, but heaven is literally right there.
Yes.
Right? And there are the biblical images when eyes are opened and people see the hosts of heaven right there. The filming of some versions of Dickens' A Christmas Carol, that moment when Scrooge goes to the window and his eyes are open to see the spiritual world right there, again, is to recognize this transcendent element of our existence, the unseen and unseen, which the Creed, I believe in God the Father, maker of heaven and earth, things seen and unseen, is part of that. So there is this recognition in the Creed itself that there is a dimension of reality that one must acknowledge, and that is the unseen. And I'd say that includes our human relationships, in a sense, are unseen. Though we see our actions, we can't see all the dimensions of our human relatedness. But in this particular advocacy of Pollard's, there is a sense of saying, if civilization is going to go on, we can't think that the material world is all there is. There is more than that. And the Judeo-Christian tradition brought that into our realm of existence. And we often say we are Greco-Roman and Judeo-Christian, but one has become so dominantly central that the other is merely paintings on the wall that in a sense have no real impact in terms of the shaping of culture. To the point that in one point he says, we live in a scientific culture, and in our privacy we have a religious faith, but it's become a private, not part of the culture. And so the book, in many ways, is attempting to revitalize the possibility of the Judeo-Christian tradition as being central to culture and what it looks like to be truly a humane people going forward as those created by God, and to have something that really extends the nature of what the best of Western culture might look like. The word providence, again, providence often has, for many people, has a sense of controlling or something like that, God controlling. For Karl Barth, providence is the accompanying of God. And so I think the sense of the accompanying of God even in the human discovery of the nature of reality, which this book has, extensive, very interesting unpackings of the nature of the history of the universe, the history of the planet, the history of humanity. It's packed with scientific insight in our understanding of the development of the way things are. The nature of the atomic, the subatomic world, all those things, again, are part of the discussion that's well there. So, though I don't ascribe to the terminology of the two books, the book of nature and the book of scripture, in a sense, there is a sense in which Pollard is trying to, without saying that nature is a book that reveals God, he is saying it is reality, and science has given us an understanding of it. That, I mean, his descriptions are beyond what I've really ever seen somebody able to give a simplified definition of the development of things. So he's wanting to acknowledge there's a book there without saying it's the book by which we read God. But to say that the nature of understanding that book, we understand that book better by understanding God, I think he is saying that. So for the purposes of theology and science at the frontiers of knowledge, it's to say we can look at the created world or environment, if you're using a term in a non-theological way, we can say there is a kind of understanding of the history of events. And John McMurray uses the word events for things that we can't see any intention, any personal intention there. But McMurray uses the word acts to say that when there is an act, there is a personal intention. If somebody picks up a 2x4 and turns and whacks you in the head and says, "I didn't mean to," it was, that was a mistake, I'm sorry, then it was just an event. But if he whacks you on the head and means to, it's like, well, I was getting you back for what you said an hour earlier. Then it's an act. So the characterization of event versus act, I think in this book, there is a sense in which Pollard is trying to see the nature of science in its broadest senses as interpreted as act, the act of God. And to understand it all at some level is to really understand the involvement of God as the one that organizes, that it's not merely coincidence that all of this is that way, but as Carrie Magruder talks about, that it's contingent upon acts, therefore personal. And the last chapter in John McMurray's book, Persons in Relation, asks the question, is the universe personal or is it not? How did we end up being persons? And he basically argues that if you look at the universe merely as all chance, coincidence, and all that, it really doesn't make sense of the universe or our experience of it or what it means for us to be persons. And so he argues that at a very foundational level, the universe is personal. It shows intentionality and orderliness. And this is, of course, divine and contingent order, a Torrance kind of theme. It's one of the points that I'll pick up when I do that article for Participatio. And that the nature of who we are as persons then is best understood as a reflection within a universe that is a personal universe. The question, go ahead.
I was about to say you froze up again, but you unfroze. Fine.
Okay.
You thought out.
Yeah. See, I don't see myself freeze. I assume myself, on fire here. No freezing.
Well,
So,
actually, what was that McMurray book title again?
the McMurray book is Persons in Relation. It's the second of the two books of the Gifford lectures. The Self as Agent is volume 1. Persons in Relation is volume 2.
That's right. Okay.
And I am considering at some point doing a John McMurray reading, a once a month John McMurray reading group. I don't know if you'd be interested in that or not, and we would start with interpreting the universe.
That's the third time I've heard you say that. So
yeah. So are you interested though?
Well, I'd have to read McMurray, wouldn't I?
No, you would get to read McMurray.
When would you do it? Like this?
I could do it like this. I'd have to find out when the people are interested and when time-wise would work out. You're in the US, so it'd be relatively close to when I would do it, but
you would probably need someone who was knowledgeable, perhaps a little bit more than someone like me.
No, that's exactly what I don't need. I need people who are interested and want to explore. That's what I need, is people who don't
like
know.
that.
Say,
so heuristic journey. Yes.
well, John McMurray is, in a sense, he is the original heuristic person. He's the one of whom T.F. Torrance said John McMurray was 50 years ahead of the rest of us in this process of discovery. So T.F. himself acknowledges that McMurray was, in a sense, the groundbreaker in heuristic thinking in the way that I think Polanyi and Torrance and others like him follow in his wake.
Well, okay. You got me. I'll go.
Right.
Send me.
No, stay. So the nature of this book then, as we're discovering it again, the sixth book, it is all part of TF's general sense that theologians should be engaging the world of science, that in the world of that we know in the history of culture, the church for a long time were the priests of truth. If you want to know the truth, you go to the priests. and the theologians, but at the point of the Renaissance, there was a switch and the beginning of scientific thought. Scientists became the priests of truth. Has science proved this, is the way we articulate that today. And so Torrance recognizes and honors at some level the validity of people coming to distrust a form of the church, but he also recognizes that one must learn to speak the lingua franca, the language of science is the language of truth today. And so these books in this series are an attempt to bring together the language and understand some key terms and what it is that the human experience is all about, of that which is other than ourselves, particularly the world as we find it and God as we find God coming to us in it. So this book, Transcendence and Providence, if you just see that as something that's outside of this world, transcendence, and providence as God controlling from the outside, you miss the point of a priest who has studied the world well and is ultimately concluding, I see that God has been at work in all of it. And if we're going to understand it all, we need to understand who God is and how God works in this world. One reviewer said, the thing I missed in this book was an ultimate kind of articulation of the person of Jesus as the one who comes and really gives an understanding. There was a missing Jesus component to the book. And one can say, fair enough, he didn't really argue that, but the nature of what he saw his audience to be, I think, that he wanted scientists particularly to recognize the insights that he had, that science that becomes soulless, in a sense, has lost the scientific agenda of really being true to the nature of the world as we find it. So he wasn't, in his first instance, in a sense, trying to equalize out the theologian and the scientist. He really is, I think, more attempting to invite scientific thinkers in by showing a competency in his knowledge of the physical world and also a clarity of what comes when we see the involvement of God at work in the world as we find it. So the nutshell, this book is built on previously published articles from the 50s right up till the point his introduction, that's in a sense a reflection on his life, I think was the last thing that was written. And so that was probably written around 87. But he's wanting to really bring together science and faith and to recover something that he feels is lost, theological perspective. And there's a number of ways that he does express that. So when he talks about the Catholic Church, it's Catholic in the sense of small c, in a sense, it's the Church Universal. He himself became an Episcopalian priest, so part of the Church of England tradition. But to say, as some of the reviewers did, he is someone who is highly respected in the scientific community because of the work that he had done over the decades before he became a priest. So he's not just somebody who had an interest in science on the side. He's somebody who really did the work, was part of major scientific projects in his day, and still maintains respect for that, even as he writes this work. Trying to remember, there's one Peacock. What's his first name? Arthur Peacock. So Arthur Peacock is somebody who I'm not sure if he's still writing. I'm not sure if he's still alive, but he's somebody who is, I think, well respected in the current climate on speaking about religion and science issues. And he's not always kind to the authors of these books, but he was quite affirming of the level of this person and hence the level of this book within the series because of the reputation that he held. So that was quite interesting to find someone as well known as Arthur Peacock affirming him. Did you have a thought there, Bill?
How'd you know?
I could just see something forming on your face.
Well, I was struck in this first chapter by which was written 10 years about 10 years or so after World War II.
Hmm.
First of all, I couldn't figure out what war he was talking about right in the beginning until I found out the date. And then, of course, read on and he explains it. But when he does a little, let's say, I don't want to say boasting exactly, but he remarks on the unique endowment of Anglican Christianity in its togetherness.
Hmm.
This is in 1956. He says this on page 10, this remarkable capacity to preserve and treasure union. This is on page 10,
Hmm.
the last sentence prior to the last paragraph.
Hmm.
He's talking about the unity in the Anglican communion.
Yeah.
This remarkable capacity to preserve and treasured union paradoxical elements which elsewhere have produced bitter and irreconcilable divisions is a unique endowment of Anglican Christianity. And look at the Anglican community today, just split into smithereens.
Yeah.
That's how many years? That's 44 plus 20, that's 60 something years. And
Yeah.
not only, of course, the Anglicans, but all over Protestant world.
Yeah. And largely over ethical issues, I think, but
Yeah. Cultural, yes,
they're
and
cultural,
ethical.
hence ethical issues. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it is
Yeah.
an issue of culture and the way it is aligning itself with certain issues. So, yeah. And again, one would say, the hope of the word communion is that our communion wouldn't be an agreement on culture or ethical issues, but that the unity of the church is ultimately found in identifying the lordship of the person of Christ.
Yes. Yes.
What a concept.
Yeah. Good concept. Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
heard
We all.
Father George Dragus say that at a T.F. Torrance lecture he gave at AAR, that the hope of the unity of the church for Orthodox and Protestant is getting recentered on the person of Christ. So it's simply true within the traditions as well, right?
Yeah. I just thought that it just makes you sad, doesn't it? It's a sad, sad commentary. And what you were saying earlier about the priest being the go-to guy,
Yes.
that's still quite alive and well in the Orthodox tradition.
In the Orthodox tradition, it's true. The
I,
question of science, even I mean, particularly the last few years, the question of science going to scientists, people have developed some distrust through the COVID 3 years of, what science are we talking about? You talk about your scientists, and I have heard more than one people say, well, that's that group of scientists, but this group of scientists are saying this. And so it's really doing in the scientific community what you were just pointing out within Christianity generally as well, and that is schools of thought or practice that align around different cultural issues that are just further dividing and making difficult the question, who do we trust?
yeah, who do we trust?
Who do we trust, right? And so I mean
Yeah,
that's at stake in this book. That is at stake going forward. And again, for us, the question is there's an obvious answer to that question.
yeah. Well, isn't I recently read comments on I can't remember which Orthodox thread it was, but they kept constantly referring to people who would ask a question about the faith as people would respond and say, well, go to your spiritual father
Hmm.
and he'll explain that to you. Spiritual father meaning the priest, the
Yeah.
parish priest. And over again, you see that. Uh, I have a friend who's an Orthodox priest, and I've yet really to ask him if I can call him by his first name.
Yeah.
There is this authority, the authoritarian thread that runs through it that really bothers me. But
Yeah.
that's another thing.
It is
Because
another thing,
go ahead.
but it's important. The authoritarian, the question of what it means to have authority without demanding authority. And when authority is demanded, what is the fear of what will be lost? You mentioned
Right.
just a few minutes ago of the heuristic element of what it is that we do, both in science as well as in faith, means that there is a fearless pursuit of truth that doesn't need to demand an authority beforehand, but rather empowers to ask the questions so that we can together wrestle with these issues and let Jesus be the one who's the ultimate authority. So the
I
fear
like
in the authoritarianism is part of the problem. And where there is fear, perfect fear casts
that.
out love.
All love. Yes,
Yeah.
indeed.
There's
Wonderful. Yeah.
there's one other element just to throw in on the element of the priest as truth giver, scientist as truth giver, which this I think this is in my third face-to-face book. My stepson one day said to me, I love Eminem. He tells the truth. And I said, what do you mean? He says, well, he tells it like it is. I hear all these other people, but, if he does something wrong, he'll say it and he'll tell it. If things are bad, he'll describe it in a way where you go, yes, that's it. And so I awakened to the place of the entertainer in the world that is developing as the priest, in a sense, of truth. People are more referring to movies, artists, and others who are able to articulate in a song or a phrase or a book something they go, now that's speaking the truth. It's a different kind of truth in a sense, and yet it's what people are feeling like is not hiding or making up a system or something, but somebody who's validating the human experience as it comes and is able to articulate it in a way that people trust them because it's true to reality. Which, going back to katafusen, good science is that which is spoken that is true to reality. So it is
What?
interesting that the modern entertainer, in a sense, is
Yes.
taking that in an interesting way. Go ahead.
What's so devastating is when the trust has been misplaced and betrayed by the authority figure.
Yeah.
Uh, it's devastating.
Yeah.
That's what the worldwide Church of God went through.
Yeah. And
And,
to say
and
that they had to allow the authority of certain people to be part of the revitalizing process. What does it mean to know God as we go forward? We've had the worldwide Church of God, but we found out there were things missing. And so, who is this God? How do
hmm,
we come to know this God? And how do we understand ultimately the Trinity? And all those things were part of a journey that, as bad as it was, it may be that the tragedy of the situation also called for the seriousness of the inquiry into finding something that was true, that have made them, one of the best at really pursuing the Trinitarian God and the implications for what the church might look like. So, I mean,
oh,
sometimes there's a silver lining that can be missed.
oh, I often thank God for the experience, every bit
Yeah.
of it. Well, most of it. Uh, Seriously, I mean, I think I have a background in people like me, like Linda, or perhaps no, maybe Linda. I'm not sure.
We're not sure about Linda, but she'll tell
No,
us
no,
what.
I don't mean that. I meant maybe I better speak for myself and let Linda speak for herself. But I think I have a background in Old Testament that others
Uh-huh.
might not have.
Right.
And I talked to my Presbyterian pastor friend about the feast days and the holy days found in the Old Testament, and he's just not quite in touch with that.
Right.
Uh, Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry to go off
Maybe
on that.
Passover and Pentecost, but there are
But
bits and pieces.
it goes back to the authority thing that
Right.
that was so hard for so many people. It just broke their hearts. So
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I have hope that there is, a way forward, even through the T.F. Torrance Fellowship, engaging with Orthodox people, that the authoritarianism need not be there, in a way that I think that Grace Communion has really attempted not to be authoritarian as well, and part of it's been through its engagement with Torrance and others, and so anyway, I mean,
I mean, that's a part to which Linda can speak for sure about side by side pastoring and going alongside that type instead of dictating.
yeah. Todd also mentions in the chat his experience with the hierarchy that is often there in Orthodoxy, and keeping being startled by a false assumption of the uniformity of theological opinion and ability among priests. And I think that the assumption is there, but the actuality is what he's saying is not. You can comment if you want on that, Todd.
Oh. Hmm.
Okay, he's still listening to the Supreme Court justices. Um,
Todd, do you have a comment?
Thanks. Well, yeah, I'm just on, say, Facebook pages that are, you can tell are supervised by Eastern Orthodox priests, usually Greek Orthodox, in my experience. I just agree that there's often this default go-to statement: "Go to your priest." And
Yeah.
I'm just flooded with little thoughts in my head, which I think my thoughts are valid. Like, hey, how do they know that this person on the Eastern Orthodox Church on Mercer Island, Washington, has time to talk with people? How do they think that he has the same opinions as the Eastern Orthodox parish in Seattle or any place else? How do they know that? Yeah, gosh. Why do they assume that this person is appropriately trained to? I mean, they just assume that there's this blanket answer that all priests have and the same opinion. And I know that not to be true from my own experience speaking to priests. So it's just very, very common, this go talk to your priest, and the priest will know the answer. And interestingly enough, T.F. Torrance, perhaps you folks have run into this, his experience with supervising graduate students underneath him. For instance, John Zizulius was 3 years his graduate teaching assistant. But anyway, supervising, did I say that name right, Marty? Zizulius?
John Zizulius.
Zizulius, okay, sorry. Anyway, T.F. Torrance's experience again and again was that they were just startled when these students were startled when they read one of the Eastern Fathers that they thought they knew all about in seminary, but when they actually read the scholars such as Cyril of Alexandria out of the boilerplate translation that had been in Eastern Orthodox seminary texts for a few centuries, they were just startled of a whole different world than they were being fed by the church. And so that I assume most parish priests out there have been fed. And so just a point, just underlining the point that they're not all of the same opinion.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's a valid insight. And I've met younger Orthodox priests who some of whom have had evangelical backgrounds, and there is a different character to them that doesn't have the same authoritarian sense, but there is a respect for the tradition, but there's not a beholdenness or a need of the individual to demand of those who are coming to ask questions to have to just submit to the answer. So I have hope that there are people who are moving in that direction. Go ahead, Bill.
Did you ever meet Matthew Baker, Father
I did
Matthew?
not. I did not. Did you?
Oh no, I wish I had. I read,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I
He's
don't know if you remember Demetrius Harper we had on the reading group um, a year or two ago. I did a
mm,
review on his book. So he's an Orthodox priest. And I
that
did
was
a book of
Demetrius last name
Harper.
Harper. Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead.
So I mean, he grew up Protestant and became an Orthodox priest and is, now well respected. And he's a Maximus the Confessor authority. And Maximus is not miles away from T.F. Torrance, which is one of the reasons I had on. And he was a good friend with Matthew Baker. So to say that there are people who were around Matthew Baker who have a climate of engagement and all that, um, there are still people out there I think we could be in conversations with to be growing together the respect for what it means to be Christians in the world as we find it within these traditions in overlapping kind of ways that everyone would benefit. I have been working at attempting to get a T.F. Torrance Eastern Orthodox meeting at the AAR, a joint meeting, and having conversations. And the person who's the head of it has been interested. There are several people who are interested. And so, with Mike being the president now, I'll be turning to him. Gary's the one I was working with, and he was somewhat open, though he was sufficiently busy that I think it was difficult for him to envision putting something like that together. So we'll
Hmm.
see what we can do, but it would be helpful, I think, to have those kinds of meeting at the American Academy of Religion to pursue how do we understand and support what each other is doing, and to recognize the work of T.F. Torrance as a bridge work between them, as Matthew Baker did. And there are others. I mean, there are books on T.F. Torrance and Orthodoxy that are showing that there are people who are engaging in these conversations.
Good.
So
Excellent.
anyway, we'll keep you tuned in on that. So back to our book for today. Just looking at there are 4 parts within this book. Part 1, the recovery of the Judeo-Christian heritage of Western civilization. The word recovery there means that there's something lost, and so that's going to be the point of that section. This part 2, which starts at chapter 6, similarities of science and religion as human activities, is very Pollyannian in nature, the nature of what it is that the church does and science does, that they're not as different as one might imagine. And when seen for their commonalities, one almost is inclined to say they shouldn't be doing things differently. They're so similar. All that needs to be done is to recognize the similarities, to begin to respect and to begin to see overlap isn't even the right word for it. It's to recognize they're all science, they're all communal activities, and they all engage reality, and they all attempt to serve humanity in their findings. So let's work together. So they do have a different object of study, one might say. The third major division, part 3, the scientific dogma of the inevitable outcome of evolution, refutation of the widespread conviction of scientists that there are numerous planets in the universe like the Earth, and that evolution is bound to produce man if given enough time, is a specific argument against a dogmatic scientific position that's going to argue for chance and to say those are wrong conclusions, and here's why. So those chapters deal with the nature of the uniqueness of what it is that is found through science, and to say it's almost impossible for mere evolutionary principles to give us what we have, and that we really need to understand them with a theological perspective. Part 4, the scientific dogma of the unreality of the transcendent. And so that's just the general sense in science that they don't believe in anything beyond what can be seen, measured, or studied in a laboratory. So a refutation of the nearly universal conviction of science that the supernatural is a pretty internal phenomenon, that nothing transcendent to the natural really exists. And so those chapters are going to be an argue for the place of transcendence within even scientific thought, and then he's creating the space within which to talk about the nature of the supernatural, and that science should not be writing that off, but rather it should be included in the revived sense of what Western culture might be is to recognize there is a place of the transcendent, and even science has it within it, if one just has eyes to see. Which I think I had the least time spent in reading these chapters, and they're the most difficult for me to understand as a not scientifically trained person. But I think they point in the direction of what I call the science of the personal, which is a survey of Torrance's thought. And that is to say, science, as currently defined, studies the world, the objective world, and attempts to say there should be no personal interpretation of it. It needs to be pure science, purely the objective world and our objective study of it. But to say that is choosing a part of the world, and we do have objective bodies, but to say that all that one could know about another human is their embodied existence is to miss much of what it means to be persons.
Yeah.
And so to say that the science of the personal is to say, if we can study the far side of the universe and the history of the universe back in time, and if we can go into the subatomic world, why have we not studied the personal aspect of what it means to be human beings with the same kind of fervor and attempt to understand? And it is a fear that in doing that, I think we'll have to face up to our humanity. But in the absence of doing that, we have become every person looking out for themselves and their own truth. It is a move towards autonomy, individualism that is breaking apart the fabric of the personal networks and really is showing up at every level. And we've been talking about in churches, in science, in politics. Everything at some level is breaking apart because we haven't done appropriate work in the field of the personal, which again is the John McMurray term. So the nature of this book is it's trying to acknowledge as a scientist that there are dimensions that are there that we need to pay attention to, that the history of what science has done has been helpful in some parts and missed things in others. And particularly his two arguments in sections 3 and 4, that there are things that science needs to acknowledge to really contribute to the furthering of civilization. Looking just briefly at chapter 2 then, the first chapter within the first section, the place of science and religion. So there's a sequence of thought here that science has a set of secular goals. And so because it has these secular goals, it looks at the world, but it looks at them with assumptions. And they're not theological assumptions. They are attempting to control the world as they find it at some level. And so to be able to take the world apart, define it, and for Pollard himself, the bomb, the nature of what it is that we do with an atom, and what the atom can do when we take it apart can be powerful at one level and destructive at another. And so the unraveling of the structures of the world, at some level, it's to understand it, but it also can literally unravel it. And we begin to live in fear of people with the power to unravel a single atom and what that can do in destroying the world. So such is the nature of power, right? It can be used for good or for ill.
Yes, and replace Adam with AI, Chat GPT, and the warning
Yes.
there before the Congress.
Yes.
It's scary stuff.
It's the unknowns are huge, aren't they? I mean, one can just simply ask, can people say, how do we destroy this people or whatever? I mean, the potential power for destructive uses seems huge. I've done just a few quick runs. I asked about some of the implications for the unwritten volume of Karl Barth's Church Dogmatics. What would he have said here? It didn't recognize that the volume would have existed, but it did take on the subjects that would have been within it and gave an outline of what Karl Barth would have said. It's like, wow. So, I mean, you can see where it could be used for good, and I'll refer to that. Just to go and look certain places when I write that volume, but to recognize it has power for the potential for good, but it also has the potential to be abused.
Yes, you began earlier asking, who can we trust?
Yes.
And so this makes it more complicated. I think,
Yes.
in 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 that this technology, can it not create reality, a sort of a false reality that seems so genuine.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, we could call it just a deeper false reality, to say that
yeah,
the nature of the world as we find it believes that each of us is an individual who is the captain of our own life, that God
mm,
doesn't exist. I mean, there are all kinds of things you would say. We are already living in a world that is largely illusory, and they think that we worship a god of our imagination. So they think that we are living in an illusory world. We would say that they are living in an illusory world, but they're creating illusions beyond the illusions within their world. Which I heard somebody today say that China, to understand what's going on in China, is like looking through three layers of glass panes and trying to make something out that has been distorted, as you look through each of those layers, of those opaque layers, to try and get at what's going on. So AI just adds another further dimension of that inability to really see the truth of what's going on. But yeah, I mean, I haven't got the whole argument, but people of the lie, Scott Peck's book, People of the Lie, to say the modern world has become very adapted to living with lies at every level. And so, we've lost a sensibility for even the need for the truth at some level. And what each person is asking about, how's this going to impact me?
yeah,
Right. So the individual is taking over instead of the good of what it means to be communities, or people of faith who submit to the person of Christ as the one who is the way, the truth, and the life. But again, the nature, one of the great insights that I had at one point along the way is that when people are afraid, they lie. Right. So if
yes.
you live in a culture of fear, guess what people are going to do? They're going to lie all the time to protect themselves. So the
And
day there was a woman who was saying, my husband's a liar, and I turned to her, looked at her, and I said, so what is it about the way that you are with him that makes it so that he feels like he needs to lie to you?
oh, and what'd she say?
Well, it took her a bit of time to recoil and to think that through. Um, she didn't get defensive. She recognized that there may be something going on. I'm not sure that we ever got the completeness of what it was that she was bringing to the table, but for me, it was a real awakening to the nature of, how does the church present itself so that people feel like, they're all just protecting themselves. They want their money, they want their power. I don't trust them anymore. I don't really feel like they're looking out for others. So it's easy to see a church that's afraid for its own existence, ending
Yeah,
up wanting to appear to the world a particular way that people look at it and they say, well, if that's your truth, I don't want anything of it. And so they're all just manifestations of an inability to live the life of love, which is the opposite of fear. And where there is love, people are able to speak the truth,
yes,
right? So it
yes,
is the revitalizing of the church is to rediscover what it means to really live in light of the loving God, where perfect love casts out fear, and the accuser, who is the father of lies, no longer has any validity, no longer has any authority through those lies. I think it was C.S. Lewis maybe who said, Satan has no power, only the power to lie and corrupt the truth. But that's quite a power,
it is.
right? Because people believe the lie and then they act in response to the lie, and on it goes in the unraveling that we're talking about. So to say science seeks a lot of truth in the world, and it's discovered, medical research and ways to build houses and all kinds of things, and yet because it doesn't function from a heart of love in doing that, it isn't able to serve in all the ways that it might, in a way that Pollard, I think, would like to be there, right? So while it may serve, it misses something critical. The humanistic goals of science is to tell the story of science as a drama of human progress, and we could say there, and not divine, right? So
Right.
it makes the human, in a sense, the author of where civilization has gone. And so that is the story that we live within, which again, just to use the word lie there, and it's, I mean, there is a propaganda of we humans, we did it, we've made it all work. And so to say, okay, doctor, how did you make it so that you could have all these things heal and all that? Is that because of what you did, or do you just recognize the body's been made to heal if you give it the right circumstances to heal, and you're just there to help the process along? I mean, in all honesty, the doctor had to learn, how does the human body function, and how do we work with it in such a way that it will do what God has intended it to do in the healing process. So anyway, that is to say then, if we tell the story so it's all about humans, we're missing the divine dimension, and it's too much. So C.S. Lewis, next to God, nothing is powerful. Nothing is very powerful indeed. Yes. So again, to live in a world where science acknowledges the work of God in every aspect and what it means to attune our ways of behaving, thinking, functioning, gathering, affirming the truth under his lordship, the world doesn't even understand what that would look like. And at some level, the church needs to start looking like that so that people can see what it would look like. If the church ends up fighting and trying to claim an authority of their own, it ends up adding to the problem and not the solution. And I spoke for a group of Presbyterian pastors in Eastern Washington. Two or 3 years before, there had been 18 churches. The issue of gay ordination came out, and there were 8 left now. So more than half had separated from the presbytery over one event. And so not to say that we have to have the perfect outcome, but the nature of one issue is enough that the presbytery fell apart, basically. And there were a few left standing, but the broader sense is we don't know how to work through issues. It's just easier to cut our ties and go our own separate ways. So in a world where that's the case, now we're living within a drama of existence where the drama is, if you don't agree, go your own way. And we just see that at too many points, I think.
It's the only
So
way to find peace in most instances within the church is to split.
it's a kind of peace, but it's not the peace my peace to have to you. It's a peace that the world does not understand. I mean, that song comes into my head quite often. But so Pollard is telling the story of what he sees as the going awry of a way of scientific thinking that becomes problematic. So the drama of God's creation is the drama of existence that Pollard is going to propose is the deeper story, again, using C.S. Lewis from the Chronicles of Narnia. It's the deeper magic from before the dawn of time is the story of the drama of God, who is the creator, and what it is that this God does, and where humanism has perverted the Christian view and taken the place of God as authority and the one who knows and understands and manages. That the church has this assignment to renew humans in relationship with the Almighty Author, which I think churches kind of would like to do that. They really want to get their pay, though, on a monthly basis. And they really want their church to appear successful, having people show up on a Sunday morning and all that. And so that there is a sense of the sustaining of the institution and the authority person within that can usurp that, even with good theology. They're overtaken by the business of the church, one might say. And so there is a problematic piece that comes from that. And Todd says the PCUSA and the ECUSA keep the buildings and the properties. So there is something that is kept. The question, yeah, there's lots of interesting questions about buildings and properties. Yeah, anyway, we won't go on that whole tangent. Yeah, there
That's a rabbit
There's-
hole.
That is a rabbit hole. The task before us, point F, science from the vantage point of God's purposes. So, here I think Pollard's really saying that there is this place of theologians and thoughtful scientists, and by that I mean Polanyi and others. I mean, even Einstein, I think, would be put into that. That we have a responsibility to reality, meaning God at some level, but also the world that is not just a mistake and not just by chance, to say we have some role in sustaining what it is that's going on. And with someone like T.F. Torrance to say, we have a responsibility to be God's people, to be good scientists and good Christians, and to work together in all these things for the good of God and the good of humanity. And so there's the challenge, for the good of God and for the good of humanity, and to play our part. That is the task before us. So the immediate place of science and religion, increasing our range of perception of the world, including being children of God. So this is an invitation to scientists that they broaden the scope of their perception, that they not just see the world as objects, but that they see that we are persons and that the world has an orderliness to it. And again, T.F. Torrance's book, Divine and Contingent Order, comes to mind there. That we see that there is a world that has been created intricately, and that we have a responsibility to maintain the world, not only for God, but for our survival within it as well. And so I think that it's a call, point G is a call for respect, to recognize the wholeness of the world, which I have notes here for a book I'm looking at possibly writing called From Systematic Theology to Systemic Theology. Systematic theology tends to break everything apart into chapters, chapter on epistemology, a chapter on the doctrine of God, a chapter on, and they don't really interrelate. And within school, even, you have the Department of Biblical Studies and the Theology Department and the Pastoral Ministries Department. That's all systemic thinking. I mean, that's all systematic thinking. We have a system here to get people through, to accredit them to go out and do a task. Systemic, if you look at your body and say, if you're going to look at any part, any system within your body, you need to see it within the whole body. So your cardiovascular, your digestive, each one of them, you have to know the system and the aspects of the rest of the body that deals with. So systemic theology would say we need to understand the whole. And even if we say the universe, we have to say the universe isn't the biggest thing here. Systemically, there is the God who creates the universe. And so with systemic theology, we have to begin with the divine presence, creation, before we then get the universe within that. How does the nature of the universe and the place of the earth within that, and within the earth, the history of the earth and all that, how does that all work in systemic kind of ways? And in a sense, where he goes from here in progressing in this book is a very systemic kind of way within science. And so to say you can't do theology without thinking about the Trinity, many systematic theologies begin with proofs of God and almost don't deal with the Trinity. This is the non-Bartian kinds of systematic theologies. And the doctrine of God is largely about proofs of God and biblical statements, that God exists by virtue of he shows up in the Bible, but really doesn't reveal the nature and character of God. And if it does, it breaks all those things into parts too. And so God ends up chopped and sliced and diced on the table, and you lose the living God. So the nature of where he's going here with this, I think, there is a helpful direction, which I would call the direction of systemic theology, which I would say Barton and Torrance are systemic thinkers. We always have to see the whole and then look at parts within the whole to understand how those elements, dynamics, function within it. So if you want to look at Jesus, you have to see Jesus in the Trinity. If you want to see the Father, you have to see the Father within the Trinity. This was somewhat the discussion last week with Paul Molnar, that the filioque, we have to see the Father as the source within the Trinity, or else you're going to break apart and you have multiple sources, the Son and the Father both become sources, and things start breaking apart.
Yeah.
So the invitation here to see the togetherness of those things, that is, I think, what he's really calling science to, and I think we really need to call theology to it in the same kind of way. And that's, I mean, that is one of my agendas in the broader scientific world, if they ever, the theological world, if they will listen to what it is that I have to say.
Well, what's the publication date for that, Marty? Just yeah.
It's a good question.
You don't have that on paper yet, do you?
I have a file opened in my books to write section, and I'm
Good.
beginning to add to it. So I always, when I get an idea like that, I open a folder, I open a document, I begin to outline, what could the chapters look like in that? What is it? What is the problem we're critiquing? What are some of the solutions to articulate how to move beyond it? So anyway, I have begun to do that.
And then you will add color to keep it
I will
interesting.
add as I go. If I sit down a year or two from now and I have a lot of good material in outline form, the writing becomes much easier.
Yes, of course.
And honestly, doing things like we're doing today add to my ability to do it, because I see things I wouldn't have seen before. So it is all part of the gaining of the insight that allows to finally sit down and just let it come. H, the crisis of faith. In what and whom do we have faith? This is our question we asked earlier, right? Who do we trust?
Yes.
So one of the things for this book, as well as for Torrance generally, is it's a rethinking of what the word faith might mean. And what he's going to propose that scientists, there is no scientist who doesn't have faith, which my dad taught science at the high school level. And the second book that I wrote in my face-to-face series, I dedicated to my parents, my mom and my dad. I talked about my dad at one point as being somebody who had rejected faith in the church, and his faith had become science of a particular form. Empirical science was his faith. I had also talked in the same chapter about an affair that he had that I had a conversation that was a great kind of reconnecting, because he finally was able to talk to somebody about something that had been just kind of the elephant in the room. He wasn't at all upset about my talking about the affair. He was very upset that as a scientist, that I would describe that what he had was faith in his empirical scientists. It's just facts. He would say that it's not faith. I didn't get to completely have that conversation before he died, but to say, if you really believe in it, you have faith in it. Right?
Yes.
And if you really believe in your doctor, you have faith in them to take care of you and to deal with the medical issues that come up. And so to recognize faith is not what is generally considered to be believing something with no evidence. Faith is the things for which there is adequate evidence, and in understanding them, you understand the world better. And that's where the word faith-seeking understanding is, to say, I know this doctor and I trust him, and now him or her, and now I would like an explanation as to what they're going to do, how they're going to take care of me, how am I going to come out the other side of this operation, so that the trust is deepened on the specific aspect of what it is they're providing, but it's still building faith even there. Right?
And if we have trust in the faithfulness of Jesus Christ, more so, yes?
Exactly. I mean, that is the point. If you have people in your life who are faithful with every promise they make to you, then you just have no problem trusting them. You have faith in them, and it's something that is based on evidence at some level, right? And so to say faith in the Christian tradition, just as much as in science, is an evidence-based way of engaging reality, and we respond to that which is trustworthy.
Was
and
it this book?
faith-seeking understanding is just a further, it's the heuristic invitation. We already know we can trust this. Let's keep understanding the implications of that.
I like that. That's right. Was it this book where the author said, "I have no faith of my own," or was that something else I was reading? In his discussion of, I wish we had a digital search function, but well, I don't need. I thought here when he was talking about his call to the priesthood.
Right.
Anyway, maybe it's
Yeah.
maybe I
No,
read some.
I think he did say something like that. It's the kind of thing Polanyi would say as well, and really T.F. Torrance at some level would as well. When we become somewhat theologically aware, it's not that we have it now, it's that we become part of a community who've been studying this for a long time. And even the nature of somebody in science um, doesn't gain their faith in science outside of being a part of a community. And so they're really sharing the faith of the community. It isn't theirs alone.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This is one of the points of commonality between the theological scientific community and the all of the physical sciences and the theological scientific community,
Mm-hmm.
is that we all have to come to a faith that is a shared faith, and the word creed and all that may be words that are used as part of that. But there are people who recite the creed on Sunday morning, so they have no idea what they're saying. And so to
Well,
say,
at least they're reciting it. So many places they're not.
They're not, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, there are also problems of reciting it and not
Yes.
knowing what you're saying. That it's like
And
saying I'm married, but I don't know what it means. Well, let's get some of that down.
and the Lord's Prayer, same thing.
Same thing. Yeah,
Wrote there.
yeah.
I
To
used to be
understand
one.
that.
I know because I used to do that.
I resemble that fact.
I
Yes.
do, yes.
Yes, and I mean, to say, as I said in one of my books, we all begin as atheists. We all don't know anything about God, and we have to learn it all. So the question is how well we have people in our life who help us to enter the community where we belong to a knowing and being known community, so that we recognize that our faith is really part of the participation of that community.
Bingo. And T.F. Torrance did that for me. Somebody did it for you or became your spiritual father along the way. Who was that?
Well, it's funny you should ask that.
Why?
It's been a long, hard journey of finding somebody to be that. There are people who show up for a year or two,
Yes.
but I have had a hard time finding people who go the long haul journey. My own father was fairly absent as a father for me. I'm the third son, the fourth child, and so there wasn't a lot of time and space left for that. So the sense of having somebody in my life who you say, who is your spiritual father, or even the person who's been the father, I have to think through a few people who've had a piece of a chapter, but not much. So
Yeah.
anyway, it's part of that piece in my life where it's like I wish I had that person, but I have not.
But you've had spiritual mentors along the
I've had
way.
people who have been there for they.
Well,
I mean,
go ahead.
I mean, somebody like Alan Torrance, I went and studied with him. He helped me to get my doctoral dissertation topic and all that, and got me going in some of the basic skills of it. And then he went and finished his own doctorate at Erlangen, Germany. He was there for a year and a half, and then Douglas Campbell took over. And so he was there to get me going in a piece that I needed, but there was a lot missing too. And he said years later, 2 decades later, I kind of thought your methodology was a little bit of a dot to dot method, because I would read and take extensive card notes, because I'd learned that in research that you lose things if you don't write them down. And then I did a lot of organizing these things around and seeing where it took me. But it was a fairly sophisticated method of listening and then ordering and then writing out of that. But he didn't see the depth of my method. And so in a sense, he was not able to be the supporter I need. And so I often your doctor vater is the person who opens doors for you to get a position. And so I mean, for the last 20 years, I've been an adjunct. because I
No.
haven't had anybody to advocate for me getting a place in the academy. Now,
Hmm.
God's used that in other kinds of ways, and He gave me a wife to take care of me financially, but I have not had the positions that would usually go along with 20 years of having achieved the academic degrees that I have. And part of it's not having a father person to get me through. Now, Douglas Campbell was my second doctoral supervisor. He took over after Alan left. He's the one that was able to get me the contract with Zondervan for my Karl Barth series. So
Well,
that's a
good.
case of, but Douglas is younger than me.
What? Say it again. What?
Douglas is younger than me, but he's the one
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I was
who
thinking
finally
that.
opened the door. But to say he has played the role of a father mentor kind of, um, at least in that area. So there are people in my life who I can point to that have given me pieces of a puzzle, but there hasn't been anybody there who has spanned a period of time of being there. And it's something that I get jealous of other people who do have those people in their life over the decades. So anyway, a little bit of history that you probably weren't looking for. But anyway,
No, I'm interested.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm listening.
good. That is good. And Todd's putting up some things here on methodological materialism, or the materialism of the gaps. So yeah, the whole.
I was
I
saying, excuse
sat,
me, Marty. Oh, excuse
go
me,
ahead.
Marty. Thanks. I was saying that in response to you talking about the quote faith of your dad. Um,
Yes.
that it's kind of a materialism of the gaps, and that is so common that they think it's just the facts, ma'am, and don't understand how much their philosophy of science is constricted.
Yes. Yes, it's it's the correlate to, I sat with a professor at University of Otago once, actually, who was talking about what I was doing. He says, oh, you believe in the God of the gaps, which is basically say you throw in God wherever you can explain it. And so materialism of gaps is the same issue, where they just say, well, we can't explain this, but um, it's all part of something that we just fill in the gaps by saying, well, I'll just happen through evolution or something. It's a non-explanation explanation. Is that true, Todd? I mean, is that kind of what you're saying there?
Yes, and there is just a widespread ignorance in society and generally among scientists, both because of their philosophic base bias that is unseen by them, and because they are simply untrained in the history and philosophy of science. For instance, it is probably under 1% of, say, university biology profs that understand that the what is called the scientific revolution. And I understand that modern science was brewing prior to that by centuries. But when we talk about people like Newton and Kepler and Boyle, roughly around 1500 to 1700, with this huge explosion of what we call modern science, that okay, getting to my point, I would guess that under 1% of, say, college biology profs understand that it was built upon a Christian worldview.
Right. I think that's true. And that's going to be part of his point in the next chapter, is that we've just forgotten the contribution that was made by Christian thinking to what we call science today. And again, that's the T.F. Torrance theme. But yeah, your points are all right on, spot on with what it is that's being said here and what it is that's missing. So thank you for that. The one other thing there in the crisis of faith, then, point H, regaining the integrity of the soul. And I'd say it's regaining the integrity of science is part of it too. So to say, if our soul has lost its integrity, we've lost our connection with the world and one another, the division we've been talking about, the need to, the feeling that we have to control our own life and not anyone else tell us what to do, seek our own ends. That's all a loss of the integrity of the soul, the network of personal relations, but also the loss of our connection with the world as well. So disintegration, to say In a world where science and theology are taken apart from one another, disintegration within the world and within science and within theology is going to be the outcome. Disintegration. And so the proposal then in this book is that a proper re-understanding of theology will help us to properly understand science, which will allow for a reintegration, a re-grounding of the integrity of the world and our place in it. And that's what we need. And again, T.F. Torrance is obviously a champion of that mission. And it's pretty near to my heart as well. Looking not as detailedly at chapter 3, the Dark Age and the Renaissance in the 20th century. So to say a dark age is when something is missing. What we call the Dark Age is largely an age where people felt like the human ability to live as humans without being overrun by the church was missing. So that's a dominance of the church and a loss of humanity. And so what is called the Renaissance is, in a sense, a rediscovery of humanity. And he's going to suggest, and a loss of the place of theology, the loss of the place of what it means to be fully human as those created by God. So the language of Dark Age and Renaissance here is things gone missing, things being refound. And in the 20th century, science brought to the fore the value of what it means to live in the physical world, science properly engaged. But what went missing was the Christian dimension as having any authoritative place in life. There are people who would say the United States is a Judeo-Christianly founded country. And you go to Washington, D.C., and there are biblical quotes, and the word God shows up on statues and plaques and things like that. So we know that there was an element that's there, but you can even there, in the way that God is spoken of, you can see that it's moving towards a deism and away from what we would call the Christianity of the Bible. The Jefferson Bible, of course, is a highly edited out Bible where the parts that he liked he kept and the other parts he took out. So Jefferson, founding father, okay. That's an example of exactly what chapter 3 is talking about here. So to say that the modern world has largely become dominated by the Greco-Roman tradition, the Greek philosophers, the systems of thought that come from that, the mathematics, the science, and all that. And so the frameworks of thought have been put out there that we have Greco-Roman and Judeo-Christian, but the Judeo-Christian has largely been pushed to the side. And so that even when, my point F there, the Greeks and the Bible, the Greeks and the Bible, the Greeks comes first and the Bible is just kind of interpreted where one might want to see what the Bible might contribute to or how we understand it through the lens of the Greeks, because the Greek mindset has become the dominant mindset. And so to say the nature of Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, these have become the models of philosophy, which is the foundational section of a library. What is the zeros in philosophy the Library of Congress, I think, that's the ones that or is it Dewey Decimal? Anyway, both Dewey Decimal and the Library of Congress begin with philosophy. And that makes the point of what it is that he's saying here is that the Greek lens of philosophy has become the entry point into the world of knowledge that a library represents. So point G, the need to rediscover the Judeo-Christian treasures is the needed Renaissance. So as he talks about a Renaissance through the rest of this book, it is the revival of the literature of the Judeo-Christian tradition, which would include Old and New Testament, the theological literature that T.F. Torrance engages, Athanasius, Cyril, all those people as well. And that we need to have an understanding of those things that lead us to understanding the nature of the world and our place in it. Point H, to say we are so bathed in classical thought, we become blind to biblical thought. Bathed and blind are my words there. He didn't use those words, but I think that summarizes kind of what the chapter is talking about. So the modern dark age is simply that we've become institutionalized. The church in many ways has become merely an institution, not a culture forming personal presence that is bringing the life of the living God to really influence and bear upon culture in a way that isn't just dealing with issues of culture in political kinds of ways, but is actually bringing God's life that creates communities of love, compassion, connection, stewardship, and all those other things that would be part of a more Judeo Christian outcome. Chapter 4, then, the two cultures in historical perspective. The two cultures, as he lays them out, that develop would be basically Christianity and science, he sees as the two cultures. Basically arguing that in the end, science has become the dominant culture and Christianity has merely become, for some people, kind of a side interest, but really doesn't shape culture anymore. One could say that there might be some critique in that. I can't remember which Huxley it was, but at one point in the history of the United States, Huxley wanted the Bible to be taught in public schools because so much of the language of what it is that literature had within it came from the Bible. And if people didn't have an understanding of the Bible, they wouldn't understand the handwriting on the wall and other things like that. So to say that even that at some level is lost, so that even in churches today, I've had professors in both Christian schools, Northwest University, I'm thinking of, and the University of Washington, James Wellman, say, it's not just the non-Christians who don't know anything about the Bible, it's the Christians who come from the Christian homes. And they have zero understanding of any book of the Bible, much less its overarching theme or what it is they would get out of it. It's just a complete blank kind of, and they have both been appalled at that. Especially pastors' kids in a Christian home, the pastor kids have no knowledge basically of the Bible. So anyway, that is part of to say that the culture of science has become the dominant motif, and whilst people would still understand that there might be something that could be called a Judeo-Christian culture, it's a study of ancient history, not anything that's significantly a part of our modern world. Though we could debate that too as well. The events of Pentecost and the coming of the Constantinian culture, he traces as a part of the history of humanity in the West that brought Christianity into place. But with the forming of the Royal Society of London, he sees that as a Pentecost type event, an event where scientists in 1660 came together and had this meeting point, and the influence from that was similar to what happened at Pentecost in Christianity, but that was the beginning of the scientific age. And that with World War II and all of those things that were developed in many ways as military or medicine outcomes of it, that the outflow of the scientific revolution took on practical application out of World War II and has influenced the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and beyond with the many outcomes of scientific thinking he sees triggered by, in a sense, World War II, in a way that was like Constantine making Christianity the dominant religion of the Roman world. So anyway, it's a chapter that's rich and deep. Some reviewers said it was a little bit overstated. Nobody said it was totally crazy. And some saw it as a metaphor. And I like metaphors that don't say too much, but do say something. And I think this does say something, at least to recognize what is lost, maybe. Did you have a thought there, Bill?
No, I was just muting my mic as my wife is snapping asparagus rather loudly in the background. I'm sorry to distract.
She's saying make it snappy, huh?
She said done. I'm sorry to.
It's all good. Not a problem. Not a problem. So anyway, the outcome of chapter 4, we need complementary cultures of nature and supernature. We need both science and the church to do what they do and to do it well and to do it together. I mean, where he's going with that. Chapter 5, I found quite interesting. We have the history of the universe. I mean, it's one of the best descriptions of the history of the universe, the development of life within it, um, the nature of nature, the ways that natural theology, in a sense, missed access to God instead of giving it to us, but that we do need to acknowledge nature and the world we live in, that the earth gives us life and all that, but to see it as sacred, that God has made it. And if we have those kind of eyes to see it, then we share with God in the human part of taking responsibility for the world. I have a friend who is developing what's called Circlewood, which is a eco theology community just about 10 miles from where I live here. And I sent him this chapter because he is a Christian. He did a DMin at Duke and really engages pastors in thinking about how do we become caregivers in the place that we live as expression of our Christian faith and engage the non-Christian community around us as well. And he's doing some really quite amazing things with that. So I sent him this chapter because I thought it was quite interesting in its conclusions and all that. Chapter 6, the relation of the Christian college to the scientific world. There are a number of chapters where he's specifically speaking to the Christian college. And so it's that place where the two of them, the science and faith, overlap, and the Christian college should be a place where that happens. At some level, he sees that Christian colleges, to survive, have developed schools of science and nursing and teaching and things like that, and the Christian elements have been pushed to the side. When I went to Northwest College, it was Northwest College of the Assemblies of God. It had been Northwest Bible College, but that had been changed to Northwest College of the Assemblies of God. Then it became Northwest University, with a school of psychology, a school of elementary education, a school of nursing, and the part that remains, the College of Ministry, is struggling to survive within what was one of the major universities of the Assemblies of God. So I mean, it's a classic example of what it is that he's talking about here, where the to survive component and the introduction of these other things without integration has meant that the Christian element has been reduced. You can just take Bible online now. You don't have to sit in the classroom to take your Bible requirements. And so less and less people are getting a personal engagement with people of faith, teaching what little is required of a nurse. I proposed to them a book on Luke Acts for nursing. Luke is a doctor, and there's all kinds of things about engaging the marginalized and the outcast and those in pain. It would have been a perfect class, but no room in the teaching schedule. There's too much for, nursing to learn to be able to include that. So this is, I think, a classic example of what he's talking about: the Christian university, the Christian school, and what is happening in the loss of the Christian component that is there. And I think a lot of it is just the finances of how do we survive. They still believe that they're Christian, but they're losing the ability to ask the question, what does that mean?
Yeah, go back and look at the motto of Harvard University from the
Harvard, Yale, Princeton. Yes. Yeah.
Veritas,
No,
it's something like Veritas and Christos or something like that, and then down to Veritas, or I found that online once. It's really interesting, and it speaks to what you have just said.
Yeah. And I do think that Princeton has maintained a level of, with the Bart Center and others, something that's there. And Miroslav Volf, I think, is at Yale. So, I mean, he's at least providing some Christian voice that is not just collapsing into the culture. It's authentic. Harvard, I'm not sure who's at Harvard. I think there are some individuals within those that don't influence the whole, but there are a few points of light rather than movements within them. And when I was at the bar conference last year, there was an announcement made: no longer will Princeton provide resources for the continuation of the Bart Center. It'll need to be financed by fundraising and all that too. So again, it's a money issue, taking away resources that allow for a really important function within that university to do what it could do. So similar kinds of problems.
So chapter
Chapter
5 is the go-to read. I should read chapter 5 before I take it back to library.
I would suggest reading chapter 5. I found it,
I will
yeah,
read it.
quite
Yes.
interesting.
Thank you.
Yes. Science's community really reflects a lot of Michael Polanyi's work and Torrance's work based on Polanyi's work of just the whole nature that science exists as a people of faith who have a history, and you have to learn the history, and you have faith in the people who are there who have learned things, and they pass on the faith that they have. So it really is a nice picture of the fact, Polanyi's whole point that all science is personal knowledge, and it's not in the title, but all that personal knowledge is the personal knowledge of a community. And that community isn't just the present community, it's the community that lies behind it that has learned to bring this present community into its current state. And if it's a really scientific community, it will be open to discovery in the future. It won't be locked into a way of trying to simply create and defend a particular set of beliefs, but it will always be open to developing those kind of beliefs. And you can just see in that kind of formulation that you have something that's highly consistent with what we wish the church would be. Right. And again, your point of the great, what would be considered the great schools who all have endowments to survive, they're not asking the question, how do we move the field of theology forward? Right? They train leaders and they give PhDs out. But again, this hit me with my wife in dentistry when a friend of hers did a PhD at the University of Washington in dentistry, and he did a PhD, not just a DDS. And he just said, in doing a PhD, we're moving the field of dentistry forward. A DDS is just the person who practices, but the PhD learns the things that will give the DDS what they need to do. We keep moving the field forward with the skills, the practices, the psychological issues, the materials that are necessary. We're going to keep feeding them what they need to move the field forward. And it just hit me. Wow, who is doing that in the world of theology? We're literally missing. I can't think of a single institution that really has that level of vision of the field. Your PhD is largely you getting the credibility to go teach somewhere. So it's become individualized in a sense. So the points then of theology generally having that vision and going forward is something I've attempted to make moves in that, but it's very difficult to get people on board to even recognize that theology needs that level of engagement. And in some ways, my Karl Barth series, there is an implicit agenda of doing that in the Insights for Theologians that's in there, that's trying to move in that direction. And also having the essays in the back that engage different disciplines to create cross-disciplinary conversations. That's also part of a broader attempt to have theology going forward by making advances through those conversations. Can you hear me now, Todd? Can you hear me, Bill? Todd says he couldn't hear anything for the last 30 seconds.
Well, when I put up that message, it was you. I think you were reading a statement, and for about 15 seconds, you were just nothing for me.
Yeah, same for me. But that was several minutes ago when you both audio and video glitched.
Yes, well, I wish I had an answer to that problem.
It could be the wildfires in Canada for all I know.
It could be the wildfires in Canada. That's true. Well, I'm not sure what it is that you missed, so it's hard to go back exactly. If you can remember what I said I was going to say, that I can try and repeat it. But
no,
we're gonna have to come up with a signal where when you're losing me, you do something, and then I stop until you say I'm back. Or something.
I don't think John Piper would be behind it.
Behind which? Behind attempting to give direction to theology as a discipline.
No, behind the glitch.
Behind the glitch.
Yeah,
I get this.
Yeah, I don't think. I hope he would not be behind that.
Right. Okay.
No, I think your endeavor in the Bart series is a great idea.
Good.
And let's. How many more of those? Number 3 is working now in the mail
Number
now.
3, I'll have number 3 done by the end of summer. I have to submit it the end of summer, basically. So, and I've already started to do the outlining and stuff for volumes 4 and 5. I'm beginning to do work on them too. But when I hand in volume 3, I have 2 years to hand in volume 4, and then 1 more year to hand in volume 5. So,
and volume 5 is the last volume.
It's the unwritten volume of the Church Dogmatics. He died before he wrote it, so I am constructing.
Oh, of course, yeah.
I'm constructing what it is that he said that he would have done, because he left some very overt clues along the way, some of them not as overt. But he also said, I've given you enough. You should be able to figure out what I was going to say there. So I'm also picking up on what it is that I think he meant by that to fill in the blanks with that.
And
will
you have the same collection or a similar collection of essays from other academics in there, or theologians?
We'll have other academics also adding to it. They will probably even be more extensive than they are currently, because there are people like John McDowell and Jessica DeQ who've specifically written doctorates on those things. So I'll probably go beyond the 2 or 3 page essays to more like a 10-page essay with their insights on eschatology, the nature of Karl and redemptive culture. So anyway, it'll probably go a bit beyond what it is that I've done in the first ones. Though I foolishly didn't give myself as many words as I should have, but I'll see what I can. I'm pushing the limits every book, basically, with word count with Zondervan. So I'm supposed to be at 130,000. I'm already at 190,000 on volume 3. So I'm gonna have to edit down, and I'm not done yet. I still have paragraph 55 to go. So,
well, if you need any help, Marty, I want just to let you know, I've been published in letters to the editor in 2 newspapers. So, I can maybe give you some tips on how to get out there and get published.
Okay. So chapters 8, 9, 10, and 11, the whole nature here, he becomes quite specific in aspects of science, in a sense. So the language of life, that's the world of DNA and all of those things that are part of the information system of the human in their existence. Chapter 9, the uniqueness of the earth, that's the history of the earth among planets. So he does some significant work on planets, the uniqueness of our planet, the history of life on our planet. So that's also, again, it's going through and looking for this irreplaceable, must be divine guidance contingency argument, in a sense. The prevalence of Earth-like planets, the argument that other planets must have something like us too, and all of the science fiction movies have all these planets with other people they go and visit. So the belief that there would be other planets like ours and ours is just one kind of diminishes the uniqueness of ours. And so this chapter is really arguing for the uniqueness of our planet, and that even on our planet, we have 3 different continents that have separated, and humans only developed on one of those, the others didn't. And so he's arguing that even within the exact same biosphere, you didn't necessarily get the same outcome that you did with that place where humans developed into what it is that we are today. So that's, again, an argument for the uniqueness of what it is that God would be doing. And then chapter 11, creation through alternative histories, he talks about arguments of what other people have said. 2 authors he looks at particularly: the creator spirit, evolution, life by Rust, and chance and necessity, pairs them against one another in an argument about things going on there. The final section, chapter 4, these chapters again are attempting to argue that within science itself, there is something that deals with that which goes beyond the mere physical or materialism or scientism as Todd has identified it. But that even within Christianity, there have been people who've been sneaking in. So he mentions Tillich and Robinson and Bultmann, who think from the human part and don't think from the divine part. So to say that the scientific, the existentialist and all that has, and he didn't use the word, but to say polluted Christian thinking would be to say even Christianity has lost a sense of the transcendent that Bart and Torrance would be recovering in what it is that they are doing. Chapter 13, inquiry into the status of non-conceptual experience. So he talks about Kant, and again, this whole thinking of the noumena and the phenomena, and that we can only look at the phenomena of the world and not really see beyond it. But that there are people like Otto who have introduced the category of the holy, and so he's going to go in that direction, that there is this dimension of reality. There are levels of reality. Think Torrance's strata of reality here. That, and he does mention Polanyi at one point in this book. This whole idea also shows up in Polanyi of the strata of the levels of reality and the need to include all of them within scientific thought. And again, the problematic sense of existentialism and logical positivism is that both collapse into the human experience. Existentialism, my existence, and logical positivism, the world's existence is just what it is in its existence, and we can't look beyond that, which McMurray and Torrance and others are really going to take logical positivism away there. So that's a collapsing into the objectivity either of my experience, existentialism, or the world as a fixed experience, and to say they're both short-sighted. They're missing the deeper dimensions of both of them that need to be there in their interplay with one another. Chapter 14, the mystery of matter. It's talking literally about matter, and you can see from this the development of the subjects, the chemicals, the planet, the atom, the electron, wave atom, particles, leptons, quarks. He really just walks through all of them a way that was beyond my ability to understand very well. And in the end says that there are dimensions of this that go beyond an explanation of just mere chance in the universe, that there's something that is beyond in the orderliness of all these things that he would imply from that transcendence and providence both being at work there. And then in his final chapters, he just argues that we need to hold the natural and the supernatural together, both of them mutually interpreting one another. People like Peter Berger in The Sacred Canopy and other books talk about the transcendent reality of social sciences, that there are realms of science that have included transcendent realities, and that those need to be followed. And that we need to see, yes, space and time, but also beyond merely observable space and time, which I think of Torrance's space-time and incarnation and space-time and resurrection are implied by what's going on there. The anthropic principle, to recognize that somehow the uniqueness of who we are is not an ending point, it's just a beginning of a great heuristic discovery of how it has all ended up this way. We live in a world that far transcends a simple explanation based on evolutionary principles, though all of those are best explained by a God who providentially is present to, develops, and nurtures the nature of existence as we know it.
Beautiful.
Now, I do have, I don't always mention this, but if people want any of the book reviews I've got, I can send those to you. I don't post them because Kerry gets them through Interlibrary, and he says, there are limitations of things that can be posted that he gets through Interlibrary alone. So anyway, I'm happy to send people if you want any of those. Just send me a text and I can send those to you. So my wife and I are heading for Spokane. As soon as I exit from here, she is waiting at the car for me. So I'm not going to extend this too much unless you have any specific questions, affirmations, or anything like that.
Bon voyage. I mean, have a good trip.
I will do that. Next week, we have on June 15th, Mike Havitz with his chapter from T.F. Torrance and Evangelical Theology, which is called Revelation, Rationalism, and an Evangelical Impulse. So that's what we have to look forward to next week.
Good.
So
Thank you
you
so
for
much.
being here today. It's good stuff, isn't it? I mean, it's good fodder for thinking and for just for the conversation.
Well, it's
As it goes
outlined
on.
very well. Thank you.
You are welcome. My pleasure to that for you. So many blessings on you. You too, Tim, in faraway Ireland. Quiet.
Bye,
Oh,
Todd.
quiet.
Good night, John Boy.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.